Welcome back to this Frontiers Web Extra. This week our theme is dueling budgets on Frontiers. We're talking about dueling testimony, dueling visions of how we're going to spend state money, what we want for Alaska. Tim Bradner is on the show with us. He publishes the Alaska Legislative Digest with his family. Matt Buxton with the Midnight Sun blog. In the conversation we had on the show, we talked about how really the legislature at this point is in the driver's seat on the budget. And I'm just always amazed from session to session to watch lawmakers evolve. And Tammy Wilson, who is co-chair of the Finance, she is a staunch Republican from Fairbanks, and you've
North
covered.
Pole.
I'm sorry, North Pole.
Yeah.
Okay, Fairbanks area. But she has said that Governor Dunleavy's budget cuts are too much, and she's the biggest budget hawk amongst them.
Yeah, so I used to work for the Fairbanks Daily News Miner, so I've spent a lot of time reporting on Tammy, hanging out with Tammy, riding around in Tammy's Ford Taurus as she goes door to door in that community. And I think the thing about her is that she's been on the Finance Committee for a long time, so she's seen these numbers. But I think the big thing is that she really, really tries to work and understand her constituents. And I think she kind of understood that her time with the budget, her time working with everybody, I think has led her to understand that these cuts are really serious. I think it's not just a kind of fun exercise in conservative governing. It's a real, there's people's kind of lives on the line, people's livelihoods on the line. The university is very powerful and popular up there, and I think she understands kind of just how much damage this budget could potentially do, and I think that's kind of why you might see her.
Let's talk about that damage, because we've already heard that there are no cuts yet. It's still just a proposed budget, but businesses and hospitals are making decisions based upon it.
I think you're seeing damage right now. The psychological effects of it can be very damaging. We're seeing already hospitals cutting back on expansions. The Mat-Su Valley, a $67 million expansion of the Mat-Su Regional, is on hold now because of the uncertainties over Medicaid in the budget. So that's real. I mean, ironically, Mat-Su has escaped the effects of the recession. No real job losses in the Mat-Su compared with the rest of the state. The reason was because of the growth of the healthcare sector out there. So now we're sort of cutting that off at the knees.
If the governor cuts Medicaid as he wants to do.
Yeah.
So the one thing that we wonder about is the permanent fund dividend has kind of been used as a sweetener. It just kind of reminds me of a parent with a toddler. Give me that toy, here's this, or give me that candy, I'll give you this. And it just feels like a bait and switch. Where are we with the permanent fund? Because lawmakers have been talking about what the proper proportion is to balance the budget.
Well, the governor on the campaign trail talked about a $6,700 PFD, so it's a $3,000 statutory PFD for this year, and then he talked about paying it back from all the previous 3 years. I think we can pretty safely say at this point that the payback isn't going to happen. Sorry, guys. But right now they're talking about this week in the Senate Finance Committee. They talked about really the interplay between state services and the PFD. So, this House has passed a budget that requires pretty deep cuts to the PFD. I think the Senate has talked about making deeper cuts. I think somewhere on the magnitude of like $247 million, and I think under their calculation, it's about a $1,400 PFD. But there's a lot of talk about changing the statute now, or changing the formula for the PFD, and basically taking it out of the realm of being a sort of political football. Because it was the main campaign priority of this last election. So it kind of sucks the air out of the room for any other discussions about the real problems with education that we have in Alaska, or any of the infrastructure issues, or energy development, or anything like that. It's all about the PFD this year.
And people holding on to what they think is important, and everybody's got their own issue.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have talked about the statutory PFD, and they forget that the statute guides the amount, the way the PFD is funded is really sort of archaic, and some would argue it's obsolete. It was put together years ago when the permanent fund was not very big.
And when there were the investment opportunities.
Right, and also remember, it's only a guideline. The legislature has the legal authority to set the dividend. That's what the Constitution says. So the statute, I mean, there are statutes all the time that we ignore, like the 90-day session. It's the legislature that makes the final decision. Now, they can follow the statute guidelines if they want, or they can follow some other guideline. They have the right to do that. So even if we change the statute, it's just another guideline.
So when do you think we're going to get done this session? Do you dare to make any predictions? I mean, is this going to be one of those, okay, I give you a budget less, more than you asked for, I'm going to veto it. It goes back and forth.
Well, it's certainly not going to be done in 90 days. I think we've heard talk about being done sometime in mid-May, which would be the 121-day deadline in the Constitution. I think that's hopeful too, to be honest. And then there's a whole issue if the governor issues issues vetoes. Are they going to come back into special session to attempt to override those? There's kind of a lot of unknowns right now.
For someone who has covered the legislature for so long, is this uncomfortable a little bit to not be able to predict things?
Well, for those of us that have to go down there and cover it, yes. Or the legislators and staff who have to live through it. One thing we should remember, too, that there is a real hard and fast deadline of July 1. If we don't have a signed budget by July 1, the state government shuts down. And that's something we have to deal with. So you could see scenarios where the legislature passes a budget, the governor vetoes the budget, the legislature fails to override, the partial budget goes into effect. I mean, it could get very messy.
It already is messy.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're going to wrap up here, but predictions on how this scenario will finally, where's it all going to lead?
I wouldn't want to hazard a guess how this is going to turn out, except I think that in the end, reason will prevail, I hope.
What about you?
I think it kind of really comes down to exactly what the governor's goal is in proposing these cuts. Does he really, truly believe that this budget that he's proposed is something that should go into effect? Does he really, truly believe that? And I think, or is it supposed to be this shock and wake up moment, to get everybody moving and acting? And I think if that's what he's hoping to do, I think people are talking and people are proposing big cuts and big changes and stuff. And so, but if he really wants to make these big cuts, he can kind of do it anyway. So, they've talked already about, I mentioned earlier that, some of the stuff can, require, some of the changes requires changes to law, but, he could still go in and veto the funding for these programs. And so, he could get really, really crazy, or it could get kind of crazy, I guess is my takeaway.
Really crazy or kind of crazy?
Yeah.
I don't know about those odds. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you both for being with us, Tim Bradner and Matt Buxton.